Hello and welcome to NewsClick. Today we are going to discuss the goings-on in the Indian Premier League of cricket, but we are going to discuss not only what's happening on the field and off the field within the theatre of cricket, but try to look beyond to see what lies behind the shenanigans that we are witnessing today. And to discuss these issues, we have with us today Shankar Raghuraman, Associate Editor, Times of India. Welcome, Shankar.
Thanks.
So let me start by asking you, how far do you think the rot in the IPL and in Indian cricket has spread?
Well, if we're talking only in terms of spot fixing, it's very difficult to say exactly how many people are involved, how many teams are involved, how many players, who knows how many umpires. I mean, you don't know how far that rot has spread. But the spot fixing or match fixing is only a symptom of a deeper malaise, and that rot has clearly spread very, very far. That's a whole culture of anything goes, a culture of let's make the rules as we go along. You know, the man who controls the purse strings controls the rules. That kind of culture is quite clearly very deeply entrenched in the IPL.
Sure. Let's start with looking at the cricket angle itself. This is not the first time we are hearing about spot fixing. We've heard about match fixing earlier. We've had the Azharuddin controversy. We've had the Hansi Crony story. We've had the Pakistani players in England. So this is not the first time this has happened in cricket, nor is it the first time that it's happened in sport. We've had the Serie A in Italy, where more than 150 matches were believed to have been. So betting going along with fixing seems to be a part of major sporting events. Given that, can Indian cricket be far behind?
Oh, most certainly not. See, the moment you introduce commerce as the major angle in sports, and that is the case, as you said, not just in the Indian Premier League, but in Major League Football anywhere in Europe or indeed in other parts of the world, including Asia, then there are bound to be people who will find the stakes extremely lucrative and will try and shortchange the system. I mean, that's inevitable.
This is two aspects I'd like to explore, because in the media debates this often comes up. One is the big distinction sought to be made between spot fixing and match fixing. And there are many experts and commentators who argue that it is almost impossible to fix a cricket match, that too many people will have to be involved, and therefore it is. But surely at some level, spot fixing, which can have an impact on the outcome of the game, is equivalent to match fixing, is it not?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, after all, if a bowler has agreed to concede a certain number of runs in a particular over, now in the context of the match, that over might turn out to be the decisive over in the match.
Especially in 2020
Absolutely, where a single over can change the outcome of the game. And there is no way that cricketer or that bookie can be sure that that will not affect the outcome of the game. So clearly they are not particularly bothered, their conscience isn't troubled by the fact that the outcome itself might change.
Quite. The second aspect is, a lot of people are arguing that the role of the underground of the criminal underworld in Indian betting is peculiar to India and is playing such a major role because the betting is taking place underground, illegally, as compared to the legal betting that takes place in Europe. Does that really influence this, given exactly what we've discussed about the role of fixing in European football, for example?
See, it is possible to argue that if you make all betting illegal, then the underworld to a certain extent gains a larger toehold. But to make too much out of that would, to my mind, be very erroneous, because after all, I mean, you mentioned the Pakistani cricketers getting caught in England. Now, betting is legal in England.
Sure.
Shane Warne and Mark Waugh were fined for passing on information on, pitch conditions and that kind of thing to bookies. Betting is legal in Australia. So the mere fact that you legalize betting does not in any way prevent people from trying to fix outcomes or trying to fix specific details of a match.
Sure. Okay. Let's come to the broader picture within Indian cricket itself. And you started off by saying that surely a part of the problem is the fact that Indian cricket, and in particular now with the IPL, has shown signs of growing far too big for its boots, becoming a place where there is no accountability, where there are no rules, where things are made up as you go along. And if this much money is involved in a game where there are no rules, then you're obviously opening the door to all kinds of illegalities and unethical behavior. Could you expand on this a little bit?
Well, let's start at the very top of Indian cricket. The chairman of the board of control for cricket, Mr. N. Srinivasan, also happens to be an owner of a team in the IPL. Now, that's a clear case of conflict of interest. How can somebody who runs the entire tournament, IPL after all is a subsidiary of BCCI, how can somebody like that also be a participant in the contest itself? So, that's one clear case of conflict of interest. And there are others of a similar nature. There are commentators who are acknowledged to be on the payroll of the BCCI.
You're speaking about Ravi Shastri and Sunil Gavaskar.
Absolutely. And clearly, it is a problem for them to speak out against the BCCI if they are contractually obliged to the board. Now, with this kind of conflict of interest being rampant in the thing, it breeds a culture of, the rules are what I want them to be.
Sure.
And that, as you said, from there to illegality or criminality is a short step.
Sure.
Also, if you look at the IPL itself, it's more entertainment than cricket really, and it's acknowledged to be such. And because of that, there are all kinds of people who are invited to, fraternize with the team at the match venue itself, and beyond the match venue, at post-match parties, and so on and so forth. Now, nobody is screening who these people are. Many of them, as for instance, now we know that Vindu Dara Singh was in regular touch with the bookies and also was very comfortably ensconced within the Chennai Super Kings setup. Now, with that kind of easy access of the underworld, of criminal elements to your players, to your team owners and so on, should we really be surprised at what we are now discovering? I don't think so.
Quite. And as you rightly say, there is a very thin line between the unethical and the illegal. If you had a law which said there is no conflict of interest, then you would call it illegal. Since you don't have a written law, but there is an assumed standard practice of not having a conflict of interest, it's unethical practices, but in other ways it could be illegal. And incidentally, when Srinivasan, if I remember right, applied first to allow his company to bid for an IPL franchise, he was then part of the board, although not its president. Absolutely. And they had to do an amendment to the BCCI constitution as a one-time exception to allow this person to. So this shows how the whole system is being manipulated or can be manipulated.
Absolutely. I mean, what really is a one-time exception? A one-time exception means, okay, the rule doesn't suit us in this situation, so let's get rid of the rule for the time being.
For you.
Yes.
Yeah. We'll not,
I mean, it's an inconvenient rule, let's set it aside. That's basically what they did, and that's exactly what they've been doing as they go along. I mean, you look at, for instance, the manner in which the situation regarding Sri Lankan players was dealt with. Tamil Nadu told the IPL that Sri Lankan players will not be allowed to play on any, venue in Tamil Nadu. And how do you deal with it? The obvious solution would have been to say, in that case, shift the venue. Let's move games out of Tamil Nadu. But that's not how they dealt with it. The way they dealt with it was to say, okay, when you're playing in Chennai, Sri Lankans will not play. And that, by the way, in a supreme irony, includes Muthaiya Muralidharan, a Sri Lankan Tamil, allegedly the community for which all this is being done.
And that, in fact, worked against all teams other than Chennai Super Kings, since there are no Sri Lankans
none who are crucial to the team at any rate.
In all this, something which has perhaps not caught the public attention as much is in the wider arena of cricket administration in this country. We've seen the Board of Control for Cricket making special exceptions for Srinivasan. There was also Krishnamachari Shrikant, who was chairman of the Board of Selectors but allowed to be mentor for the Chennai Super Kings, and he's now playing a mentoring role with the Sunrisers Hyderabad. So a lot of cricketers are also part of this unethical set of practices, but also cricket administration in the state boards in which politicians rule the roost. You've got Arun Jaitley in Delhi, you've got Narendra Modi in Gujarat. They are all part of the BCCI board. You're not hearing anything from them about unethical practices or manipulation, etc.
Indeed. I mean, the BJP would normally be jumping at the first opportunity of attacking any Congress politician, but in this case, there's Rajiv Shukla, who's a minister in the government, who also happens to be the IPL commissioner. But we haven't heard either Mr. Jaitley or Narendra Modi or indeed any of the other political figures involved in the world of cricket saying a word about it. And Mr. Shukla, for 2 days after the scam broke, was not to be found. You couldn't hear him, you couldn't see him, and nobody seemed to mind, because as you said, they're all involved in these questionable arrangements, and it doesn't suit anybody to raise a fuss about it.
So given the extent to which big business in India, and you can't get bigger than the owner of the Mumbai Indians, politicians from all the major political parties and cricket authorities, legends of Indian cricket past and present, are involved in this unholy nexus, is it at all possible to envisage that police investigations are likely to go anywhere with this?
Well, we can only hope that there are some individual police officers out there who will be willing to buck powerful political figures and bring this to some kind of conclusion. But yes, it is a rather desperate hope. I mean, the truth is that with so many powerful figures, both from the world of business and from the world of politics, not to mention cricketers themselves who are power figures in their own right in India, with all of them being the accused, as it were, it is very difficult to see the system really being able to tackle the problem.
It's also ironic that we are seeing today one of the strongest critiques of the current IPL administration is coming from Lalit Modi, who was the former chairman or commissioner of the IPL, who also left the IPL under a shadow of similar peculiar doings involving the Kochi team and the Rajasthan Royals and others.
Absolutely. I mean, as you said, it's all about, it's about cronyism. So, right. So, if you're not part of the crony club,
then you're left out.
If you're on the outside, then you're clearly critical of the new club that's come into being.
And you are affronted because you're not part of this.
And suddenly all that is wrong about this setup becomes obvious to you.
Yeah. But when you are part of it yourself,
then it serves your purpose.
Normal. Yeah. Since you brought up this issue of cronyism, would you agree that what we are witnessing in the world of cricket is not confined to cricket, but is part of the culture of Indian business and the nexus between Indian business and politicians, and the absence of any accountability or system of accountability or ethical practices, both in corporate governance and in political governance in this country?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at all the recent scams, the fact that so many of them pertain to exploitation of natural resources, an area which has not been very strictly regulated in the past, for the simple reason that it was the state which had a monopoly on extracting natural resources. Now, you have a situation today where the private corporate sector is very much part of this process, but is still operating in a regime of little or no control, no regulation, and the name of the game is cronyism. I mean, so you basically try and ensure that you're on the right side of those who are in power, or that they can be paid off to do you favors, and that's very much the backbone of this system that we have now.
Where there are no rules, but rules are made up as you go along in order to suit the convenience and interests of this or that.
In this Supreme Court case on Colgate, for instance, one of the things that the CBI had to tell the court was, we have not been able to find any criteria on which the allocations were done.
Right.
I mean, that is basically saying there are no rules.
Right. And today's paper, in fact, carries a story about a potential price fixing which is going to be done
in the
on
oil
the gas,
sector, oil and gas sector
fields, which is going to be also equally arbitrary and without any foundation whatsoever.
Absolutely. And each of these arbitrary decisions cost the exchequer tens of thousands of crores, sometimes even hundreds of thousands of crores, and results in a corresponding benefit to the private corporate sector.
Right.
And with those stakes, you can see why there is a lot riding on this system.
And exactly what we've been talking about. In the field of business at large, none of these are considered to be criminal. At best, they are looked at as some malfeasance somewhere where you can ask one minister to maybe step out of the way, and then everything goes back to everything being exactly what it was earlier.
Yes.
And it's the same thing that is happening in cricket as well.
Absolutely. All the questioning is really restricted to why him, why not me?
Right.
I mean, it's not about what is
a norm,
what is the rationale for this kind of allocation. Should there be a more transparent method of doing things? That's not really the fight. The fight is about why him, why not me?
And therefore, perhaps it is not surprising that some of the IPL franchises, as they are called, also involve some of the big figures of Indian business who have also been in one form or another named or suspected of peculiar business dealings. One can think of the Sahara Club, one can think of goings on with the Deccan Chronicle in Hyderabad. Nobody still knows who is behind the Rajasthan Royals, and Mumbai Indians. I think the less spoken of, the better.
Oh, and you left out the Royal Challengers Bangalore.
Bangalore.
To my mind, one of the instances which highlights the the complete moral vacuum in which all of this is happening. Here is a man whose companies are allegedly bankrupt. His airlines went third. Can't pay his employees, but you see him, his son, and various nubile young things.
Enjoying good times.
Oh yes, having good times, as they would put it, yes.
Yes, indeed. Therefore, what we are witnessing with the IPL in the field of cricket, where IPL was the new shining brand of cricket, supposed to be tailored for the new generation and the modern era, has come to exemplify much of what we are witnessing in Indian business, in corporate business, and its nexus with political governance in this country, which is a lack of any norms, crony capitalism, and it's the same thing that is coming to characterize. So we should not be surprised at the ills that are confronting us.
Not at all. We've set up a whole new value system in which the only thing that counts is success. And success defined very narrowly in terms of how much money you make, how much power you wield. And it is understood that anything goes in the pursuit of these two goals. I mean, whatever it takes to get more money and more power is legitimate, is by definition legitimate.
So if that applies to the chairman of the board, or if that applies to the owner of a franchise, why should it not apply to a player or a bowler or an umpire?
Who at the end of the day is making a fraction of what these people are.
That's right. So can we then conclude that all this that we are witnessing in the IPL is a symptom of a broader malaise, which can be put down to this new era where the animal spirits are supposed to be the dominant driver behind success?
Indeed, indeed. It is very much the free play of animal spirits that we are witnessing both in the IPL and in the larger arena of business and politics.
Thank you, Shankar.